There's a building in Basel, Switzerland that you've probably never heard of, but it controls more money than Amazon, Apple, and Google combined. Inside this tower, 60 of the world's most powerful people meet once a month to make decisions that affect your mortgage rate, your bank account, and whether your country slides into recession or prosperity. They call it the Bank for International Settlements, but you can think of it as the secret bank that controls all other banks. If you've ever wondered who really runs the global financial system, today you're going to find out. And trust me, it's not who you think it is. Picture this. Every month, the heads of the world's most powerful central banks board private jets and fly to Switzerland. Jerome Powell from the Federal Reserve, Christine Lagarde from the European Central Bank, the governors from the Bank of Japan, Bank of England, and 56 others. They don't announce their agenda to the press. They don't live stream their discussions. But when they leave that building, the financial fate of billions of people has been quietly decided. This isn't some conspiracy theory. This is the Bank for International Settlements, and it's hiding in plain sight. Founded in 1930, the BIS has operated for nearly a century as the central bank of central banks, coordinating monetary policy across the globe and setting the rules that every major bank must follow. Yet ask 100 people on the street what the BIS is, and 99 will have never heard of it. So how did this secretive institution gain so much power? And more importantly, how do their decisions in a Swiss conference room end up affecting whether you can afford a house, whether your savings earn interest, or whether your country's economy crashes? Let's pull back the curtain on the most influential organization you've never heard of. The story begins in 1930, in the ashes of World War I. Germany owed massive war reparations to the Allied powers, and the international community needed a way to handle these complex financial transfers. So they created the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, choosing neutral ground to house this new institution. But here's where things get interesting. The BIS wasn't just another bank. It was given something almost no other organization possessed: complete immunity from government interference. The BIS enjoys diplomatic immunity, meaning Swiss authorities can't search its premises, tax its activities, or subpoena its records. Its staff carry diplomatic passports. Even its communications are protected from interception. Think about that for a moment. This financial institution has more legal protection than most government agencies. The original plan was simple: handle German reparations and maybe facilitate some international banking cooperation. But like many powerful institutions, the BIS had bigger ambitions. World War II provided the perfect opportunity to expand its influence. And this is where the story gets dark. During Nazi occupation, the BIS continued operating, even conducting business with both sides of the war. They handled transactions for Nazi Germany while simultaneously working with the Allies. This controversial period nearly led to the BIS being dissolved after the war. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, many countries voted to shut it down entirely. But the BIS survived, and here's why. Central bankers realized they needed a place to coordinate policy away from political interference. As the global economy became more interconnected, they needed a forum where they could speak frankly about monetary policy without journalists, politicians, or the public listening in. So the BIS reinvented itself. Instead of handling war reparations, it became the meeting place where central bankers could coordinate their policies, share information, and most importantly, set the rules for how banks around the world would operate. By the 1970s, as the Bretton Woods system collapsed and currencies began floating freely, the BIS found its true calling. Central bankers needed more coordination than ever, and the BIS became their private club. But this wasn't just a social club for monetary policy nerds. This was where the real power shifted. Today, the BIS employs around 600 people and manages over $300 billion in assets. But those numbers don't capture its real influence. The BIS doesn't control the global economy through the money it manages. It controls the global economy through the rules it writes. Every bank in every major economy follows regulations written by committees housed at the BIS. When your bank decides how much money to lend, what interest rate to charge, or how much capital to hold in reserve, they're following rules that trace back to Basel, Switzerland. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works. In 1988, the BIS released something called Basel I, the first international banking regulation standard. This seemingly boring document changed everything. It required banks worldwide to hold a minimum amount of capital relative to their risky assets. Suddenly, a decision made in Switzerland determined how much money banks in New York, London, Tokyo, and everywhere else could lend. But Basel I was just the beginning. Basel II came in 2004, introducing more sophisticated risk measurements. Then the 2008 financial crisis hit, and the BIS responded with Basel III, dramatically increasing capital requirements and introducing new liquidity rules. Here's what's remarkable. These weren't laws passed by democratically elected governments. These were standards developed by central bank committees meeting in Switzerland. Yet they became the law of the land in virtually every country with a major banking system. How is this possible? The answer lies in the unique position central banks occupy in the global financial system. While politicians come and go, central bankers often serve for decades. They build relationships with their international counterparts. They share a common language of economics and risk management. And they all face similar challenges: maintaining financial stability, controlling inflation, and managing economic crises. The BIS gives them a place to work together, away from the messy world of democratic politics. And that's exactly what makes it so powerful and so controversial. Every 2 months, the BIS publishes something called the Global Economy Meeting Report. This document, usually about 50 pages of dense economic analysis, might be the most important publication you've never read. It shapes how central banks around the world think about inflation, interest rates, and financial stability. When the Federal Reserve decides to raise interest rates, when the European Central Bank launches a new monetary program, when emerging market central banks intervene in currency markets, they're often following playbooks developed through BIS coordination. But the real power of the BIS isn't just in coordination, it's in crisis management. During the 2008 financial crisis, while politicians argued and markets collapsed, central bankers were on conference calls coordinated through Basel. They arranged currency swaps, coordinated interest rate cuts, and prevented a complete collapse of the global banking system. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the same thing happened. While the world locked down and economies collapsed, the BIS facilitated unprecedented coordination between central banks. The result was the most aggressive monetary response in history, with central banks around the world acting in virtual lockstep. These responses probably prevented complete economic collapse, but they also raise uncomfortable questions about democratic accountability. Some of the most important economic decisions affecting billions of people are made by unelected central bankers, coordinating through an institution that operates with diplomatic immunity. Let's talk about how this actually affects you. When the BIS sets banking regulations, it determines how easy or difficult it is for banks to lend money. Stricter regulations mean banks hold more capital in reserve, which means they lend less money, which means higher interest rates for borrowers. So, when you apply for a mortgage and the bank tells you the interest rate, that rate is influenced by capital requirements set in Basel. When your credit card company determines your credit limit, they're following risk assessment guidelines developed by BIS committees. When your local bank decides whether to approve a small business loan, they're calculating risk using frameworks created in Switzerland. The BIS also influences exchange rates and international capital flows. Their research and policy recommendations shape how central banks intervene in currency markets. This affects everything from the price of imported goods to the competitiveness of your country's exports. During financial crises, BIS coordination can mean the difference between a recession and a depression. But it also means that economic policies that affect millions of people are decided by a small group of central bankers meeting in private. One of the most fascinating aspects of the BIS is how it's structured to avoid democratic oversight. The bank is owned by central banks, not governments. Its board consists of central bank governors who are already somewhat insulated from political pressure in their home countries. And it operates in Switzerland under international law, making it virtually immune from any single government's control. This structure is intentional. Central bankers argue they need independence to make good long-term decisions about monetary policy. Politicians, they argue, are too focused on short-term electoral cycles to manage complex economic challenges. There's some truth to this. Countries with independent central banks generally have lower inflation and more stable currencies. And during crises, central banks can often act faster than legislatures bogged down in political debate. But critics argue that this system concentrates too much power in the hands of too few people. They point out that central bank independence often means independence from democratic accountability. And they question whether it's appropriate for such important economic decisions to be made by institutions that operate more like private clubs than public agencies. The BIS represents this tension in its purest form. It's an international organization that operates with minimal oversight, making decisions that affect the global economy. Its supporters say this independence is necessary for effective economic management. Its critics say it's fundamentally undemocratic. Recent events have intensified this debate. The massive monetary responses to the 2008 crisis and COVID-19 pandemic have increased wealth inequality in many countries, as low interest rates inflated asset prices. Critics argue that central bank policies coordinated through the BIS have benefited wealthy asset owners at the expense of ordinary workers and savers. Meanwhile, the rise of digital currencies and fintech is creating new challenges for banking regulation. The BIS is already working on frameworks for central bank digital currencies and cryptocurrency regulation. Once again, decisions made in Basel will likely shape financial technology around the world. Climate change is also becoming a BIS priority. Central bankers increasingly argue that climate risks are financial risks, and the BIS is developing frameworks for incorporating environmental concerns into banking regulation. This could eventually affect which projects get financing and which don't, giving the BIS indirect influence over energy and environmental policy. So what does the future hold for this secretive institution? The BIS is likely to become more powerful, not less. As the global economy becomes more interconnected and complex, the need for international coordination grows. Digital currencies, climate finance, and emerging market stability all require the kind of technical expertise and international cooperation that the BIS provides. But this growing power will likely face increasing scrutiny. As more people become aware of how much influence the BIS wields, demands for transparency and accountability will probably grow. Some countries may push for more democratic oversight of international financial institutions. The BIS itself seems to recognize this challenge. In recent years, it has published more research, given more public speeches, and made more effort to explain its work to non-experts. But it remains fundamentally secretive about its most important function, the private meetings where central bankers coordinate policy. The Bank for International Settlements represents something unprecedented in human history. A truly global financial institution with the power to shape economic outcomes worldwide, operating with minimal democratic oversight. Whether you see this as necessary technocratic governance or dangerous concentration of power probably depends on how much you trust central bankers to act in the public interest. What's undeniable is that this institution exists. It's incredibly powerful, and most people have no idea it's making decisions that affect their daily lives. The next time you hear about interest rate changes, banking regulations, or international financial coordination, remember that many of these policies trace back to those monthly meetings in Basel. The global financial system is incredibly complex, but at its heart, it's run by people making decisions in rooms most of us will never see. The BIS gives us a window into how that system really works, not through democratic processes or market forces alone, but through careful coordination by a small group of very powerful people who believe they know what's best for the global economy. Whether they're right or wrong, they're definitely in charge. And now you know who they are.